You think you're safe in your home? So did they, before the horror began. These are 7 of the scariest true horror stories ever told. This happened when I was 12 years old, and it wasn't that long ago. My name is Alex, and this story took place in Connecticut when I went to visit my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins. Their names were Ryan, who was 18, and Brandon, who was 16. I won't waste time, so I'll get straight into what happened. I arrived on a snowy Friday afternoon, the kind of snow that sticks to tree branches and makes the sky look white. My aunt's house sat on the edge of a massive forest. The trees were tall and dense, and even during the day, the woods looked dark. My mom and aunt had both warned me, do not go into that forest, it's huge, and you'll get lost. I nodded, but I was a curious kid and didn't always listen. The first day, I just relaxed and packed, played video games with Ryan and Brandon, and watched the snow pile up outside. By the next morning, the entire yard was covered in deep, fluffy snow. Around noon, I went outside to throw snowballs at a fence post. Ryan and Brandon joined me, and after a while, they asked, "Hey Alex, want to go into the forest with us?" I hesitated, remembering my mom's warning. Still, something about the snow-covered woods pulled at me. It looked like a frozen mystery waiting to be explored. So I said yes. We bundled up in thick coats and boots and pushed through the snow. The forest was silent, except for the crunch beneath our feet. In some places, the snow was knee-deep, in others nearly to our waists. We walked for about 10 minutes, laughing and pretending we were on an adventure. Then, we heard a scream. It sounded like a young girl, sharp, high-pitched, and terrifying. We froze. The air felt colder all of a sudden. I looked at Ryan, then Brandon. Neither spoke. Ryan finally shrugged and said, "Probably nothing." So we kept going. But a few minutes later, we heard the exact same scream again, same pitch, same length, like a sound loop. This time, even Brandon looked nervous. He tried to act calm, saying, "There's nothing to worry about." But he hadn't finished his sentence when the scream came a third time. My heart pounded. Even though the snow slowed us down, we turned and ran, crashing through branches and gasping in the freezing air. We finally made it out of the trees and back into the yard. We were panting so loudly that we almost didn't hear the banging sound coming from the old wooden shed near the fence. Ryan, being the oldest, cautiously went to look. Nobody was inside, but the latch was broken and several tools were missing. He closed the door quickly. None of us said what we were thinking, but we all felt uneasy. We should have told our parents, but we were afraid of getting in trouble for disobeying. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My room was on the 2nd floor, and the only thing outside was the snowy rooftop. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The tapping continued, like someone trying to get my attention without waking anyone else. It only stopped when the sun came up. I hadn't slept at all. Later that morning, we shoveled snow from the driveway and played football in the yard. The wind was biting, and the sky stayed gray. As we were playing, the scream echoed again, closer this time. Brandon ran to the garage and returned with a metal baseball bat. Ryan grabbed a flashlight, and I picked up a heavy stick. We followed the sound to a patch of bushes. There, half buried in the snow, was a small battery-powered radio turned all the way up, looping the same girl's scream. At first, I was relieved it was just a prank, I thought. Someone had set it up to scare kids. But then I noticed the footprints, large ones leading away from the bushes toward the back of the property. Before we could say anything, a man stepped out from behind a pine tree. He wore a dark winter coat and a knit cap pulled low. His face was pale, and his cheeks were red from the cold. He called out, almost like a friend, "Hey guys, come with me, I have something to show you." Ryan yelled, "No." The man smiled a stretched, unnatural grin showing far too many teeth. Then he rushed at us through the snow. Luckily, he slipped on an icy patch and fell, giving us a few seconds to run. We reached the back door, threw it open, and slammed it shut. My aunt and uncle rushed in, alarmed by the noise. We were trembling and out of breath, but managed to tell them everything for us. The scream, the shed, the tapping, the radio, the man. My aunt turned pale and called the police. Officers arrived within minutes and searched the yard, woods, and shed. About an hour later, they found the man walking along a side road. He still had a hammer and cordless drill hidden in his coat. That's when I learned his name, Carl. He was my aunt's ex-boyfriend from years ago. He had moved out of state after she married my uncle, but now he had come back. The police believed he broke into the shed for tools, planted the radio, and used a recording of a screaming child to lure us. His plan was to grab us, threaten us, and force my aunt to come meet him. He thought she would leave my uncle if it meant saving us. If she refused, he was going to hurt us. That was his twisted plan. Carl went to jail that day. The police said the deep snow slowed him down, and his fall probably saved us. I still remember the look on his face as he slipped eyes wide, arms flailing, and that awful grin disappearing. That night, my cousins and I all slept in the living room with the TV on. None of us wanted to be alone. I felt safer, but kept checking the windows. Snow kept falling, slowly covering Carl's footprints and the radio's trail. The next morning, the police returned to collect the broken radio and take more photos of the shed. They told us we were lucky kids. I thought about what my mom and aunt had warned don't go into that forest. They were absolutely right. We could have gotten lost or worse. I felt guilty for not listening, but also incredibly thankful that the story ended the way it did. Now, whenever snow falls heavily, I remember that week in Connecticut, the scream in the woods, the tapping on the glass, and the man who thought fear could tear a family apart. He failed, and I'm glad he did. We stared at each other, trying to breathe, none of us wanting to face the garage door. We stood in a tight circle for nearly a minute, listening. The house settled with faint creaks, but the air felt different now, like someone else was nearby, just out of sight. Lena made the first move and said, "Master bedroom, lock it." We rushed across the hallway and slipped into Mom's room, which had a stronger lock than the others, plus an attached bathroom with another door if we needed to retreat again. Kayla kicked the door shut, turned the bolt, and pulled the curtains tightly closed. The room felt larger than I remembered, but the dark corners seemed alive. We grabbed whatever we could use for defense. Kayla clutched a heavy table lamp by the base. Lena took Mum's old softball bat, and I held a thick metal perfume bottle that was cold and solid in my hand. We sat on the carpet next to the bed, backs against the wall, and listened to every sound beyond the door. The alarm remained quiet, but each time the wind knocked a branch against the siding, we jumped. Minutes stretched into hours. My eyelids drooped, but every time my head nodded, a noise jolted me awake. I kept staring at the gap beneath the door, expecting to see a shadow cross the hallway light from the nightlight. Around 4 a.m., the sky lightened and birds began to chirp, making the house feel nearly normal again. Still, we waited another half hour before Lena slowly unlocked the door. The hallway light flickered, but nothing moved. Together, we walked through each room. All the windows and doors remained locked. Finally, we reached the garage entry. My stomach turned as I grabbed the doorknob and opened it slowly. The garage was dim, lit only by a single bulb overhead, casting long shadows across boxes and tools. The big lift-up door was closed, with the hinge bar still in place, but the air smelled faintly different, like cold night clinging to the walls. We didn't step outside. None of us wanted to check for footprints. We shut the door and decided that was enough. Soon after, Lena called her older brother across town, and I phoned Mom at the hospital. She stayed calm on the phone and promised to check the security footage once home. She reminded us that she alone kept the key to the backyard gate. Nobody else should have been able to stand behind the garage door, unless they climbed the fence. She got home a little after sunrise, walked the yard, and found no broken boards or signs of forced entry. The camera above the porch hadn't recorded anything, but the alarm system log showed 2 trips within 3 minutes, both labeled garage side door. Someone or something had tried to open it twice. We never got a real answer. No neighbors reported seeing anyone or hearing anything. The alarm company guessed it was a glitch, but they couldn't explain the faint tool scratches found on the outer garage knob. Mom had the lock replaced the same day, but the damage inside us was already done. Lena started sleeping with a pocket knife under her pillow. Kayla wore headphones to drown out every creak. I often woke up sweating when the wind hit the gutters. Even Mom later admitted the house never felt truly safe again. Years passed, and when the landlord said the roof needed major repairs, we packed and moved across town. None of us argued. After settling in the new house, Mom confessed she felt relieved to leave those nights behind. Sometimes, we drive by the old house. The front lawn looks smaller, and someone has repainted the siding a lighter shade, but the garage door remains the same. I wonder if the lock I tightened that night is still there, hiding its scars under fresh paint. I turned 13 this year. People think kids forget scary moments as they grow, but I remember everything clearly. The 2 sharp screams of the alarm, the single crack in the distance, the rattle of the doorknob. In the moment I opened the garage, we never found out who or what tried to get inside, and maybe that's the scariest part. The unknown stays with you longer than any face you can name. Back in the car wash bay hours earlier, I had heard that same raspy, playful but wrong-sounding laugh. Now it faded again, and nothing else happened. I waited for 5 or 10 minutes with my phone in hand, then slowly climbed upstairs. Maybe that was it, I told myself. Maybe he finally left. I couldn't fall asleep easily, but sometime after midnight, I eventually drifted off. At around 3 a.m., thirst dragged me awake. I tiptoed downstairs, still half asleep, when I felt a cool draft. The back door was hanging open just an inch. My stomach dropped. My first stupid instinct was to slam it shut, but then I heard a soft rustle from the living room. I peeked around the doorway. In the faint glow of a street lamp shining through the curtains, I saw the outline of someone crouched behind the couch. I could clearly see their wide shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Terrified, I backed away and walked as silently as I could upstairs. I locked myself in my room, hands trembling, and called 911. While I whispered to the operator, a floorboard creaked outside. Then, I heard the laugh again closer, now followed by slow, uneven steps. The man reached my door and pounded on it with both fists, screaming slurred threats and foul words I'd never heard before. The thin door shook under the force. The 911 dispatcher remained calm and said officers were already on my street. I told her the intruder was inside the house, upstairs, right outside my door. She said she would tell the officers to enter through the back since it was open. The pounding suddenly stopped, followed by silence. Then I heard heavy boots thudding down the stairs. The front door must have lit up with police lights, because everything went quiet. Officers shouted commands, and I heard the sound of metal hitting the kitchen floor. A moment later, an officer knocked on my bedroom door and told me it was safe. When I stepped out, I saw 2 other officers handcuffing the man from the car wash. A large kitchen knife lay on the floor near his feet. He stared at me with glassy, dazed eyes, mumbling nonsense. There was still dried blood on his forehead from earlier. They charged him with breaking and entering, possession of a weapon, and several drug offenses. I keep thinking what might have happened if I had walked into the living room instead of going back upstairs. I replay every small decision I made that night, the driveway I chose to hide in, locking the doors, calling the police, and how each one probably saved me. I don't ever want to know what he had planned. Please, learn from my story. Always, look around, trust your instincts, and lock every single door before you go to sleep. Jenna entered the apartment expecting to see her aunt or cousin Stacy, but found no one in the kitchen. She called out, "Hey guys, it's just me," and heard no response. Walking down the short hallway toward the bedrooms, she looked into her aunt's room, which was empty, and called again. "Hey Stas, it's Jen." Still hearing nothing, Jenna began to think the apartment was empty, since it was small and hard for anyone inside not to hear her voice. From the hallway, she noticed the bathroom was empty and dark, but her cousin's bedroom had its light on, softly glowing down the hallway. Jenna stepped into the doorway of Stacy's room and saw Stacy sitting on the edge of her bed, facing away and not moving. Surprised that Stacy hadn't responded earlier, Jenna asked if she was okay but got no reply. Concerned and confused, Jenna slowly walked into the room, imagining all sorts of bad possibilities for Stacy's strange, stiff posture. Just as she reached the bed, she suddenly heard her aunt's voice from the kitchen and the front door opening, followed by the sounds of grocery bags and casual conversation. Then she heard Stacy's unmistakable voice replying cheerfully to her mom. Jenna stood frozen in disbelief. Her cousin's voice was clearly coming from the kitchen, yet she was also right in front of her on the bed. In shock, Jenna turned to tell her aunt she thought no one was home, but stopped mid. A cold fear swept over her. She turned back towards Stacy's room, and to her horror, the figure on the bed turned its head in an unnatural way without moving its shoulders or body. Instead of her cousin's familiar face, there was a horrifying, slate-gray face, with sharp angles, black sunken eyes, and a mouth without lips. The creature stared back at her like a dark, empty mirror. Jenna screamed and ran down the hallway to the kitchen, yelling, "There's another Stacy! She's not right, she's in your room!" Her aunt and cousin followed Jenna back to the room with a baseball bat, but it was empty. The only sign of anything, there was the faint impression on the mattress where the creature had been. They searched the apartment, thoroughly. No exits, no broken windows, no crawl spaces. There was no way anyone could have left. But Jenna knew what she had seen. It wasn't her imagination, not a trick of light. It was something real, something evil, wearing her cousin's face like a mask. She never visited their apartment again, and she never forgot that day. I believe it scarred her deeply, a dark reminder that the world holds terrifying, unexplainable things. I work for an outdoor outfitter, and my kids and I already had camping gear, but my wife had never camped with us before. wanting her to be comfortable. I bought a large family tent, one big enough to stand in. We planned to meet friends and their kids at a lake only an hour from home. By mid-afternoon, the tent was up, packed with sleeping bags, backpacks, and our cooking gear. Then we took a walk around the lake. The weather looked calm and the forecast had said nothing about storms, but the lake was in a valley known for sudden blasts. Halfway around, the wind changed completely, trees bent, sand flew, and white caps formed on the water. I saw something flash across the lake over tent. It was flying like a kite, gear and all. I kicked off my shoes and dove into the water, swimming hard to grab the tent's tie-down cord and pull it back. Everything inside was soaked. The rainfly was ripped, poles broken, and some small items were lost for good. We built fires to dry things and decided to sleep in my wife's ancient station wagon, barely running but with a roof. Friends arrived just before dusk and helped with blankets and space for our kids. We laughed about the chaos and thought the worst was behind us. At midnight, my wife and I climbed into the wagon, flattened the seats, and lay on an air mattress under damp quilts. Rain began tapping the roof, turning into a downpour. Lightning lit the sky, and thunder cracked nearby. When I asked over the walkie-talkie if the kids were okay, my son shouted, "Yeah, this is awesome," trying to be brave. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck a tree between the tents, sending bark flying. The ground shook, and all the kids screamed, running to their parents' cars. 8 of us packed into our wagon as the storm raged. Then came silent, just a heartbeat, a quiet, and in that stillness, we all heard it. Low wail from the forest. Not wind, not human. Something shaped like a voice. Lightning flashed again, and I saw a tall, thin figure at the edge of the woods, as if the storm had carved out a human shadow and nailed it to the trees. Flash after flash. The figure never moved, but never left. The strange, haunting wail continued. It was an animal, not language, just broken breath like air through a cracked whistle. We sat for 40 minutes, soaked and frozen with fear. Finally, the storm faded, and the sound drifted away. When I looked again, the shape was gone. But I know what we saw and what we heard. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't just the storm. Tents and broken branches covered the muddy ground, and our station wagon refused to start. So we stayed cold until dawn. At first light, we crawled out, our shoes weighed down by thick mud like wet concrete. We found the big pine tree that had been split by lightning, its trunk jagged and its core burned black. But strangely, there were no footprints and no evidence of any night visitor. One of our friends joked it must have been the storm playing tricks on us, but nobody laughed. We cooked oatmeal on a propane stove, while steam curled from our soaked clothes hanging between the cars like sad little flags. The kids finally started chatting again, mostly about the tree that had nearly fallen on them. My wife said nothing until we packed the final cooler back at home. Then, standing in our driveway, she firmly announced that she was finished with camp. But oddly enough, just 2 months later, she agreed to go again, certain that nothing could ever be worse than that night. And nothing ever was. Over the next 28 years, we camped through light drizzle, intense summer heat, and even the edges of a mild hurricane. But we never again heard that eerie wail under lightning or saw the motionless shadows standing silently in the trees. I patched up our first tent by hand, using a needle, thread, and nylon squares. We still own that tent. The storm left rusty stains along one side, and sometimes when the moonlight hits the fabric just right, those stains almost look like a tall, thin figure. My wife insists it's just dirt, but she still refuses to camp anywhere near that lake. Again, and I don't blame her. It was a cold night in early November back in 2018, when I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour convenience store just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The store stood alone at the edge of town, and the road was mostly empty after midnight except for the occasional trucker or late-night. The bright fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and the hum of the refrigerators was the only constant sound as I stocked shelves or swept the floors just to pass time. The night started off normal. Around 1 a.m., a couple of teenagers came in to grab snacks and energy drinks, laughing loudly. Once they left, silence returned, and each minute dragged as I kept watching the clock, waiting for sunrise to break the long stillness. At around 2:30 a.m., headlights pulled into the lot. A beat-up, rusty pickup truck rolled slowly into the farthest parking space from the front doors. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, sat there with the engine still rumbling and headlights lighting up the store window. I couldn't see him clearly from inside, just a shadowy figure hunched forward and motionless. I continued wiping the counter but kept glancing up, feeling a small knot of discomfort forming in my chest. At first, I brushed it off as late-night nerves from too many quiet shifts alone. Finally, the truck door creaked open, and the man got out. He moved with strange slowness, every step heavy and deliberate. He was tall and thin, wearing an old brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, hiding most of his face in shadow. I greeted him politely as he came in, trying to stay calm. He didn't reply, barely even acknowledging me, and started slowly pacing the aisles. He wasn't shopping, just walking, pausing sometimes to stare at the shelves. His quiet, slow movements felt deeply unsettling. I pretended to stay busy behind the counter, occasionally watching him through the security mirrors. After what felt like forever, he finally picked out one can of soda and came to the counter. Up close, I noticed his pale skin, hollow face, and most of all, the strange emptiness in his eyes. He didn't speak, only handed me a crumpled dollar bill, and then looked away as if avoiding my gaze. I gave him his change, and he left without a word. I felt a wave of relief but kept watching him as he went back to his truck. Instead of getting in right away, he leaned against the door, sipping his soda while staring directly into the store. He stood there for several long minutes. My nerves started unraveling again. I wanted to lock the doors, but store policy didn't allow it during open hours. Eventually, he got back in the truck, started the engine, and slowly drove off into the dark. I exhaled, thinking I had overreacted, maybe just spooked by the silence and late hour. The store went quiet again, and I busied myself with the coffee station. But less than 20 minutes later, the same headlights appeared. My stomach clenched. It was the same battered truck, this time parking closer. Again, he sat still, engine running, headlights bright. Fear surged in me. I moved behind the counter and picked up the store phone. Then he got out again, but this time moved quickly, purposefully, heading straight for the door. My heart raced as he came inside. He walked directly up to me and stood there, silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, scratchy, and tense. "Were you here yesterday?" he asked. I hesitated. I had worked the night before, but nothing strange had happened. "Yes," I said cautiously. He stared hard at me, lips trembling. "Did someone come in here asking about me?" he asked, his voice now urgent. I tried to remember, but nothing stood out. "No," I said gently. "No one asked about you." He looked at me a moment longer, then suddenly turned and walked quickly back to his truck. Without another word, he drove off, tires screeching as he left. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. The rest of the night dragged on slowly, every sound outside making me jump. When the morning staff arrived, I told them what happened, though it sounded vague and odd in the daylight. A few days later, while reading the local news online, I saw his face again. The headline made my blood run cold. "Man wanted for questioning in missing persons case." The article said a woman had disappeared 2 nights before my strange encounter. She was last seen at a gas station near town, driving alone late at night. Police were looking for a tall, thin man in a brown jacket, driving a beat-up pickup, exactly the man I saw. As I stared at the grainy photo of his face, that same blank stare chilled me to my bones. I realized he must have been looking for someone who saw him, someone who could place him there. I never saw him again, but I quit soon after. Even now, years later, just driving past that store sends a chill down my spine. The questions from that night still haunt me, and they probably always will.